What is the cost of answering God's call? What is the cost of following Christ? These are two really hard questions for us to think about today as we listen to a few who did just that. Moses answered God's call. The disciples answered Christ's call to follow him. So what about us? What is the cost of saying yes? We hear two very familiar stories today. The story of Moses' prophetic call by way of the burning bush, and Peter's rebuke of Jesus' first telling of his passion, followed by Jesus' command that one must lose their lives on earth in order to gain life in heaven. The cost here, then, is really life itself. Moses certainly knows that to answer yes to God means giving up his life, or to put it a better way, giving his life over to God. The disciples soon learn the same thing, that they must be willing to give their lives fully to following Christ. They know there is dangers to this, but they also begin to learn what the ultimate gain will be, eternity with God. The call of Moses to be the one who leads Israel out of bondage in Egypt begins with what we call a theophany. A great word, one that you should try to work into your everyday vocabulary. A theophany is a manifestation of God in both a visual and audible way, such as the burning bush. Moses sees a fire that burns on the bush, yet does not consume it. Then he hears the voice of God speak to him and call him to service. As is usually the case in the call of a prophet, there is a protest. Moses tries to say no. God does not let him say no and responds to all his protests, his urges to resist, with a promise of being able to give him what he needs to succeed. Moses is not sure of his own ability. He resists. He tries to get out of it. He doubts. But God will not hear it. This is God's will we're talking about. Moses really doesn't have a choice. Peter, too, doesn't have a choice. The gospel reading we have today is one that always amazes me every time I hear it. Just last week in the verses that preceded today's gospel, we heard Peter confess Jesus as Messiah. And Jesus says that upon him, Peter, the rock, he will build his church. Not even a few breaths later, Jesus tells him to get behind me, Satan. Peter goes from a rock to a stumbling block, from a foundation to one who causes another to fall. Jesus just gave Peter credit for not listening to earthly voices, but the voice of his Father in heaven. Now Jesus tells him he's too focused on earthly things and not enough on heavenly things. And then begins his discussion about denying self, losing earthly life, taking up your cross and being a disciple, a follower of Christ. Peter didn't like what Jesus was telling him, that he would be killed. Peter wouldn't hear it, wouldn't believe it. Peter had doubts. Sometimes I just want to reach out and shake Peter and say, this is Jesus talking. Why wouldn't you believe what he says? His doubt, though, is really not about doubting what Jesus is saying, as much as it is doubt in himself. Doubt that he could handle it if what Jesus is saying is true. Moses doubts his own ability. Peter doubts his own ability. We too have doubts about ourselves. And why? Why do we doubt? I've asked this before. Why do we doubt? Why do we resist what God and Jesus are calling us to do? Why do we resist the urge to believe? Why do we think we can't do it? I was driving in my car the other day thinking about this sermon. And as I often do, I was thinking out loud. I was saying the very words I just said. Why do we resist the urge to believe? Why do we think we can't do it? we must believe that we possess the ability to do what we are called to do. And I'm working this out, and I continue saying out loud, yes, out loud in my car while driving, that Moses says, "No, I can't," but God says, "Yes, you will." Peter says, "No, Lord, that can't happen," but Jesus says, "But it will. Get behind me, Satan. You are too focused on earthly things. You are blinded by doubt." And at this point, I stopped talking. And I was just letting my mind process what I had said out loud when suddenly it came to me. And I said, "Well, there it is, God. There it is." What came to my mind in that moment was faith. They must have faith. I must have faith. We must have faith. I thought about that for a minute, and then I looked up to heaven and said, "You're right, Lord. You're right." There is no room for doubt when we have faith. There is no need to resist when we have faith. God tells Moses and us that God will be present, will give us what we need, if only we believe and have faith. Jesus tells the disciples and us that he will be always with them and will give us strength. We must have faith. We must believe this. Hearing the word faith wasn't just a timely answer to the questions I was shouting out loud in my car. It was also a reminder of how quickly we can forget that basic notion of just having faith. Now, that being said, life is not a piece of cake just because we have faith. Remember, we've already said answering yes to our calling comes with a cost. I have this sign at my house in our entryway that says, "Faith makes things possible, not easy." How true that is. Faith makes things possible, not easy. God never told Moses the Exodus would be easy. Jesus never told the disciples that following him would be easy. In fact, he said it would be very hard, and they would be persecuted and possibly killed. If we truly wish to follow Christ, then we must live into the example that he gave us. Change our lives in such a way as to be Christ to others, to love, always. The grace of God invites us into this life that we live and experience as a body of believers, a community built on the foundation of the church. Faith, then, is our response to that invitation of grace. Faith is our response to that invitation of grace. We are a community of believers, a community of faith. And because of that, we can do anything we set our minds to. Anything that is good and honest and of God. And we have great stories that we tell over and over of those who have come before us and lived their lives in faith. The very stories we have been hearing over the last several weeks, the stories of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and now Moses. And it goes on from there. David, Elijah, Isaiah, Elizabeth, Mary, Jesus, the apostles, and us. We are part of that story, a story of believers, a story of faith, not doubt, but faith. Faith makes things possible, not easy. But it takes the whole community to make it work. We cannot do it all by ourselves. We need each other to hold us up in prayer, to believe with us, to share in our faith. We need to reorient our lives to focus on what is good and helpful and loving. Turn away from selfish lives to living our lives to Christ, to reaching out to others in love. Now, this does not mean we forget ourselves completely, but we must put God first, not ourselves. Paul sums it up perfectly today with his words to the Romans. And again, like last week, we did not read this today, but listen to what Paul writes. Let love be genuine. Hate what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with mutual affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Imagine what the world would look like if we did that. Paul continues, Do not lag in zeal, be ardent in spirit, serve the Lord, rejoice in hope, be patient in suffering, persevere in prayer, contribute to the needs of the saints, extend hospitality to strangers, bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse them. Seriously? Look around the world today at all that is happening. Are we doing this? We are told, do not curse those who persecute us, because Christ did not curse those who persecuted him. He asked for their forgiveness. He showed love. Shouldn't we do the same? Paul writes, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Overcome evil with good. If we wish to truly follow Christ, we must be willing to accept the cost of that calling. We must be willing to love always and to make no friends with evil. We must be willing to have faith, believe, and hold up our brothers and sisters all over the world in prayer, in love, and in gratitude for all the many blessings of our lives. There is a cost associated with doing this. There is a cost of answering God's call of following Christ. But it's a cost paid out of love and a willingness to take up our cross and follow. A willingness to lose our life so that we might gain it. So what about us? What is the cost of saying yes? Let's find out. Amen.